All right, good morning, everybody. Let's see, January 25th, meeting number 11. Our numbers are starting to dwindle a bit. I appreciate the diehards being here. I am recording this meeting just as a reminder. Anything before we dive into all the reply comments that were filed? All right. So there was only, I think, 3 parties filed or circulated reply comments, namely Sierra Club, Joint Utilities, and OPC. Anybody want to jump in and their reactions to these comments? Any areas where we might be able to reach common ground? Not all at once, everyone.
I can start, Judge.
Thanks.
Just some quick reactions to some of this stuff. I know we didn't send any reply comments to what Sierra Club put forth. They talked a lot about proactively identifying large loads, especially around fleet electrification. And I think the utilities very much agree that's an important aspect of this. And in, I think in previous comments, we've talked, indicated how important kind of utilities working closely with the private sector is going to be, and having some of those conversations to understand where those loads are going to be. Both the joint utilities have customer programs around fleet advisory services, which creates opportunities for us to engage with customers in addition to our existing avenues for talking with customers around those. And to really
Jacob, what are your existing avenues, just for folks who, including myself, who may not know?
Sure. So there, we have a, as part of the EV pilot program within Maryland, there's a fleet advisory service program, which gives the utilities the opportunity to engage customers on what a fleet electrification would look like, and be able to help provide them some of that technical analysis and technical support as they kind of work through some of those challenging transitions for electrifying fleets. In addition to that, some of our key customers have large account representatives where we're continually having conversations with customers and talking about some of those electrification plans. So those are just a few of the kind of existing avenues that we have to work with customers in those discussions. With regards to
Wait, you got a question from Mr. Cathan?
Yep.
Before you go on, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate the information about how your connections. I think the broader point that's in the comments is going beyond the discussions, in terms of it takes a number of years to do the upgrades necessary, especially for a large fleet, whether it's an Amazon or whatever, flips over to electrified trucks and vans. The question is, what are the utilities doing and proactively looking forward than just these discussions, and making it such that when they do flip over to electric, that you have the capability to serve it?
Certainly. So I think that's where those early conversations come in, right? Recognizing fleet electrification has varying size impacts, obviously, depending on the fleet. And that ultimately leads towards infrastructure projects. And so having those conversations early with those customers and understanding what those fleet electrification plans allow the utilities then to execute on the projects that then support the electrification of those fleets.
Okay, you're not addressing one of my questions, which was having to do with that. How many years does it take to do an upgrade to serve at least, let's say, a larger customer who would be a multi-megawatt in addition to load at a particular location? Is this something that can be to serve them? Does it take more? I assume, and I'm not an expert. I'm not a distribution engineer by any stretch of imagination. How many years would it take in order to serve a customer who, and how many years in advance do you need to have those conversations in order to serve them?
Sure. So my understanding, and others from the utilities can chime in here as well, is each of those is going to be a very project and location specific, right? It's going to depend on what the customer is interested in doing, what their fleet electrification plans are in terms of how they're scaling up, or if it's a full electrification. It's going to be dependent on the electric grid at that location. And what the available capacity is there. And so all those things are going to be factors into, what infrastructure, if any, upgrades are going to be needed to be able to support that customer. And that's, so those time for projects and the duration for projects is going to vary and be very unique and specific to each location. And so really, that's why ideally those conversations are happening as early as possible to be able to accommodate those kind of varying time frames.
Okay, thank you. One last question on this. Sorry to belabor it, but there are certain locations that I would expect that you would see, where warehouses or whether the distribution centers are located, whether it's around BWI or whether it's around Hagerstown. Are you the utilities looking more at serving possible a large loads need to serve those? Are they proactively thinking about that?
Can you repeat that? I just want to make sure I fully understand where you're going with that one.
I think there may be nodes on the distribution system where there already is existing location because it's an airport, or whether, especially at Hagerstown and the connection of I-70 and I-81, is a transshipment location. So the question are the utilities looking at just, I understand you're saying that you're talking to the customers, but are there portions of the grid in which you are expecting, even if there is a certain number of them, there is a larger load possibility for switching over to electrified fleets?
Sure. I'll give an initial answer, and again, if others from the utility, especially the capacity planning teams, have any other thoughts, very much welcome them. A lot of those locations, as I mentioned, we have those large customer reps. We already have relationships with some of those kind of key groups in those areas, and so that gives us the opportunity to have those discussions with those groups to be able to lead towards, what do their plans look like. So where we have some of those more industrial areas, we have relationships, from my understanding, with those customers. And that gives us the opportunity to have those discussions and understand, their timing of their plans, which then can inform our planning.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Jacob. This is Ron Nelson on the phone with Strategy on behalf of OPC. Just some follow-up questions on that. When you're discussing transportation electrification through your advisory services, are you discussing automated load management, EV energy management systems with those customers through that service?
That's a good question, Ron. I don't know the specific details of that and whether that's an aspect of that or not. I don't have those details on that program.
Yeah, I mean, that just, that's when you need to be talking about load management, is before things are energized, because that's how those capacity benefits and alterations to forecast can start to take form. So if you're not doing it, you should think about doing that.
All right, Tim?
Yeah, I'll actually expand on that from Ron. Just kind of, and this is something that we hit on in our follow-up comments, of kind of just as like a larger look at this of and it also connects back to kind of what we're talking about with the interconnection working group overlap of this capacity expansion, proactive expansion of capacity for interconnection groups, more talking about it in terms of exporting DG, but we see it as being a very similar conversation about importing, electrification loads as well. And so one of our recommendations is that the utilities should be in this planning process, developing their own processes for that encompasses like the forecasting of where these loads are going to be, regardless of whether or not like there's a specific customer that has plans there. So there's a forecasting aspect, but there's also the aspect of right sizing, which is what we're talking about, overlapping with the interconnection group of how do you figure out what level is needed there, based on both forecasting, but also, to Ron's point, management of load. And so, we need to come to, and this might not be, a little bit too granular for this working group, but, all the things that we need to be thinking about are, not only how are you forecasting load, but also what level of load management can you expect these customers to also be implementing when they build out these loads, and where does that put you in terms of like right sizing your infrastructure when you do need to increase capacity. So we're in favor of some sort of requirement for utilities to have a plan for that puts together some kind of criteria that highlights and fully scopes out what they're forecasting, how they're forecasting it, what type of load management they expect electrification customers to implement from day one, and then how that basically translates into calculating the right sized infrastructure upgrade.
Yeah, I just want to chime in real quick. I know there are a couple hands, but I also do want to clarify, because I think often in this working group, we talk about two worlds, right? What's happening today and also what's best practice and looking forward. So a lot of what I've been saying is really about what we're doing today, right? We're already having some of those conversations with the customers today and using that to be able to fuel kind of, some of our forecasting. But, as we've put in some of our previous comments, we very much are forward looking in terms of that future vision and wanting to be able to forecast load growth, DER growth, and use that to drive investments. And I think that gets to some of your points there, Tim, around using that to drive investments in the infrastructure and upgrades versus basing it purely on customer conversation. So I just want to make sure differentiating what I've been talking about is more in the current today, where we're already taking steps to work and address this, and differentiating that from a lot of the future discussion that we've kind of had throughout this working group.
So Jacob, just kind of follow up on what you just said, and I think Mr. Cathan's questions. So the joint utilities are at least looking, again, or will look into the future where these potential loads could come up in terms of fleet electrification, again, outside of your conversations and things, your existing services and outreach that you're doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, to kind of recap is
Right, okay.
is where we had our future vision for DER and load forecasting that incorporated forecasting EV growth, EV technologies, DER growth, etc. And using that would ultimately inform the distribution system planning upgrades to support any of those capacity growth that is a part of that forecast and addressing any of those constraints.
So it sounds like you're at least anticipating kind of what Tim is looking for. Is that in terms of, you actually obviously have a plan or criteria for forecasting. Tim, I don't want to speak for you, but are you liking what you're hearing, or probably not in the detail?
I'd fully believe that the utilities are working towards this. And I think my specific recommendation is I think that we need to formalize that. And I think that, if we're talking what goes into, regulations, I think it's reasonable for us to have some sort of, specific formalized like report or plan that is filed by utilities, put together and filed by utilities on this, that kind of pieces all those parts together into one piece.
All right. Thank you. Jacob, I know you probably, maybe hearing this for the first time, you have a wag on whether or not that might be doable for the joint utilities?
So I know we've been working towards kind of developing further the utility straw proposal in the process, which
Okay.
obviously would incorporate some type of reporting. And I think even, as we had presented it previously, incorporated some amount of, reporting on that analysis. So it's certainly something more we can take back, especially some of the conversations with right sizing and different things like that. But I know the straw did include some, some amount of reporting out to stakeholders.
So, and before I get to everybody else, so the straw, are you guys still kind of working on that? Is it still trying to bring some life into it?
Based on some of the previous conversations with the working group, we've been working to develop that in more detail, and going to take that to the transparency subgroup. And I'll make one final plug here. I've gotten some emails of people that would like to participate in that. Any final people that want to, please email me, and end of this week, early next week, gonna send out a poll to look to schedule that. But we have been looking to develop that further to bring back to the group.
Okay. And I'm sorry, one more. Your transparency subgroup, are you guys still haven't met yet, or?
Yeah, since it was going to be kind of based around the straw proposal of where are the points of transparency, where are the engagements, we wanted to put a little bit more detail behind that, bring to the subgroup to work on that.
All right, fair enough. And just as a reminder for everybody, if we continue meeting at the same pace, we've got about maybe 6 meetings left if we're going every other week. So if we just some food for thought, for what we have to cover, and we got a couple subgroups out there. So certainly want to try to avoid meeting every week if possible, just because I know that's a lot of a strain on folks. But thanks for that update. A couple hands up. We'll go to Mark and then Al.
Yeah. Thank you, Judge. Good morning, everybody. Representing Potomac Edison, we're not one of the joint utilities, but want to mostly just jump in to agree with most of what Jacob had said before. We as a company are obviously excited, ready to make the investments to serve future load, and we do those forward-looking forecasts, including working with these large customers. I was mentioned the Hagerstown area. We don't serve Hagerstown, the city itself, but around there, we've seen a lot of that growth. We definitely support that, but we do need to balance. There's a significant risk of stranded assets if we are to make these investments without, having firm contracts or commitments from customers in place. These capacity upgrades are very expensive. They're very local and non-transferable. It needs to be a two-way discussion. We have an example of there's a substation we have in Washington County who was built based on very credible development plans. That's been in service for about 10 years and is still mostly unused. And we have a lot of those examples, but that's the risk. We want to be there when the load is there. But if we make those investments, even in slightly the wrong place, they may not be where the customers eventually need them to be. So there definitely is a balance there, because all of our customers are going to pay for those upgrades, or at least a portion of those upgrades, whether they're used or not. So, we have to balance, the new customers coming in or the ones that are doing electrification with, what our customers have to pay overall. But happy to continue to work with the Exelon utilities with the straw proposal and those other groups, and also to provide some kind of feedback on our program. But we do those forward-looking views. We do work with those large customers and try to build them into our forecast.
Thanks for that, Mark. I know there's kind of some things that will probably impact the firm commitment and building things out. So we'll probably come back to you at some point, because I think Sierra Club had raised some tangential issues on that. Al, and then Mr. Cathan.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, Judge. Good morning, everybody. Very important discussion. In this distribution system planning discussions that we've had, we've largely and appropriately focused on what the utilities need to do, including forecasting and everything. But this discussion, and particularly what Mark just said, make me want to just point to the fact that there are new roles for everybody involved, including the customers and including the PSC. And so I'm thinking, based on what Jacob has been saying, is that as we complete this process, the PSC really should have the role of consolidating and promulgating the information on what grid requirements are going to be involved with any particular kind of project, like a large fleet electrification, and that the people should have that access to that information in advance, so they know it's going to be a 2-year timeline or whatever, so that they can participate appropriately in the process. Because, like the case that Mark was pointing to, the customers may be asking for things that eventually don't materialize, but at the same time, they may have plans for something they need to materialize because of their financing or whatever within 2 years, and it's actually going to be 2 years before the capacity is even there for them to start the project. So there's an information function here that I think is actually really important. And there was an interesting Resource for the Future webinar yesterday talking about economics of the future and so on. And the estimate is that every year delay in a distributed energy project raises the price of the cost by 20%. So if you delay a project by 3 years, that's a 60% cost increase that affects the project's viability ultimately. So anyway, this promulgation of information function by the PSC, I think, is something that we need to be talking about in addition to what the utilities have to do, which is also important.
Before you click off there, Al, in terms of consolidating the information, I mean, what exactly are you looking for, or do you have a vision, or is that just, are you just coming up with that now and you just want to throw it out there?
Well, I'm just coming up with it now, listening to this discussion.
That's okay.
For example, for large projects that are going to put demand and potentially bidirectionality into the system, I'm not sure that the folks who are planning these processes understand entirely the utilities requirements in terms of how much lead time and information they need to be able to respond. Because when we're asking them to forecast, that's fine, but they're sort of guessing how customers are going to behave. The only people who really know how customers are going to behave are the customers, but they may not have the information about the communication they should be having with the utilities in advance to understand, in the context of any particular project, what the timeline will be.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. We got Mr. Cathan and then Eric.
Thank you, Judge. Just a couple additional points about in the Sierra Club comments. It points to the advanced clean cars and truck regulations that have been promulgated in Maryland, which require 100% of vehicles by 2035 to be zero emission vehicles. And so I know we've had discussions in the weeks past about what will be in the scenarios, and that one of these is the policy scenario. But I understand that's going to be how we're recommending that the utilities be looking at it. But I guess my more fundamental question is, and I understand what Mark was saying about the possibility of stranded assets and such, but it's a broader question of, given that this is going to be happening in the next 12 years, and it does take years to do the infrastructure development. I understand you're talking to the individual customers, individual, corporations and such, but what broader work is being done to prepare for this a full electric, future?
All right, thank you, sir. I think that's open for Jacob and Mark or anybody from SMECO.
I apologize. Can you repeat the last part?
I was just saying that what is the current plans from the utilities to prepare for the fact that 100% of all vehicles will have to be ZEVs by 2035. Are there current plans in place, or is this something that's being, waiting to see if the actual load shows up?
So to clarify, it's not all cars; it's all new cars, correct?
I understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I think as we've talked about through the working group, working towards incorporating electric EV forecasting into the planning process, and obviously that forecasting would account for or would incorporate. As we've talked about various scenarios, one of those may potentially look at what does that start to look like, and so that would be, incorporated within the forecasting, which would then lead towards, system upgrades, as appropriate to be able to support that electrification growth that we would see as a result of that. And so I think, as we've kind of outlined in those comments previously, that'll be incorporated into the DER and load forecasting updates.
So just to follow up, you're saying that it will be incorporated in forecast, but there's no direct work at this point being done by the utilities to prepare for 100% sales of electric vehicles at this point.
I guess what I'm saying is that is the work that's being done to prepare for that, is the work to incorporate that within the forecast.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Eric, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Judge. Appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts. First, I'd like to respond to the last question in regards to what the utilities are doing. You know, we're looking at approaching this in a very methodical and strategic way. First, we've done numerous studies in regards to looking on the impact of electrification, whether it's transportation electrification, building electrification, and all the different changes that and storage and DER. We've done a bunch of studies. We've shared that with at multiple venues, multiple ways in the past. So that's one. Two, we are updating the tools that we use to be able to forecast and plan the system, right? So those are things that we're doing internally to prepare. Three, we're looking at our planning guides and making modifications to our planning guides to really incorporate CSNA and the impact of electrifications on the system. And the next level is to be able to use these tools to help build a forecast, the multiple different forecasts that are new to the entire process and are cornerstone, really cornerstone in us being prepared for electrification and the likes. So just wanted to give a little bit of insight on what we are doing from a utility perspective. Do we have steel in the ground as yet? Right. I'll say not from an electrification perspective, unless we have customers that comes to us with specific projects, whether they are fleet electrification, they're doing building electrification. There are a bunch of them that's happening out there that we are working with customers on today. So just wanted to be transparent and shared some feedback to that question that Mr. Cathan asked. To Al's comments earlier, totally agree with you, Mr. Bartlett, in regards to, everyone has a skin in the game, right? And interestingly, a lot of the questions are directed to the utilities, and I see this as a stakeholder meeting with everyone, saying some of the questions that are being asked of the utilities. The utilities are also looking for some information from the stakeholders and what you all will be bringing to the table to help this process be more transparent, because the last time I looked in a glass, it goes both ways, right? On both sides of the glass we can see things. So transparency works both ways as we continue to unfold. So I think it's important, as we are having these conversations, not only ask what the utilities are doing, but also share, right, what can be brought to the table to help with this. And Mr. Cathan has shared some thoughts on that. I do appreciate that. I just want to make sure I give a shout out to the fact that he has contributed with sharing some of the things that can be brought to the table. I struggle sometimes when I talk with Mr. Tim Cook, because I'm wondering if I'm talking with the CEO of Apple, but
no relation, none of the same. none of the wealth.
You know, but one of the asks, I like the recommendations that are being made by your team from an OPC perspective. Really like the collaboration there. And ask from the utility side that would be very helpful is priorities attached to some of the asks, because we are hearing like multiple asks, the things we need to do, and we're hearing the asks being needed like right now, right? And there's no priority. And as we are discussing some of your feedback, because we do listen to the feedback and the recommendations and the asks that you have here, some of the things that we are struggling with at the utility side is how to prioritize some of the ask and some of the things that we are seeing that are cornerstone and foundation that we should be focusing on, like right here, right now, to build the basement or the first level before we can even build the fifth level for some of the asks, right? We are struggling with. So to help us as we are working through this working group to better focus on how we continue having dialogue with the stakeholders, I think it would be helpful if we can attach some priorities to some of the requests that are coming from the OPC team, because we can't address everything right now, right? And I know Judge McLean may be cringing, right? But really, we may be looking at DSP meeting version 3, right, to answer some of these things, because we're not going to be able to address everything in this second phase of the meeting. So just sharing transparent. I tried to be one of the individuals who contribute to these meetings by sharing with you all things that we're discussing internally to help provide some insight that the utilities are really taking into thought, the feedback we get here and things we are doing, and just share with you all also some things that you all can do to help us. So thank you, Judge McLean, for giving me an opportunity to just share some of the things we're doing internally here.
Thanks for the comments, Eric. And yeah, no cringing at all. I'm sure what may be important to the utilities and may be important to OPC and Sierra Club may be completely different from what the commission tells us is important. So, and I think that's ultimately the folks that will be setting the priorities. So, Tim, did you have something to follow up on, sir?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really helpful ask from Eric of terms of prioritization and like process. I'd say that I think our first step in pretty much all of this is we really would love to see a roadmap, and I think that's kind of like the most useful thing that this like this working group can work through and put into regulation is having each of the utilities create roadmaps for this type of thing. So we'd really love to see, like we were saying with the report, of what is the plan to progress this process. And we don't expect that tomorrow that you start having a fully fledged forecast for electrification, but we'd love to understand where each utility sits in terms of when they think they can develop these DER forecasting mechanisms, when they think they can provide put together real criteria on when does forward-looking electrification capacity expansion makes sense, or DER DG capacity expansion makes sense. I think the other thing, so the first part is a roadmap. We'd love to see a real plan for each utility, specifically because of the fact that we know that each of the utilities is going to have a little different plan. We really can't in this working group dictate that each utility is going to do this exact timeline or anything like that, and we'd be here forever trying to come to an agreement on that. The second part, I think, is for a top priority for us is on that point that Ron was making of load management, if you guys aren't already having these conversations, we know you're engaged with your customers on electrification. And we think that if you're not having these conversations about load management with your customers now, we think that you should be. And it's something that, yes, there's like some processes and things that need to be expanded on and developed, but a lot of these like load management systems exist today for EV charging and all these other things for like large commercial style electrification. There's lots of like building energy management systems, that kind of thing. So there's all these like potential pathways that we think that are immediately usable. And we think that you should at least be having those conversations with your electrification customers today about those.
All right, thanks, Tim. Jacob.
Yeah, a couple things kind of following up on Tim there. I think, with regards to the roadmap, I think that gets a little to what Eric was saying is obviously, I think, we would want to be able as the utility to set what that roadmap looks like, but recognizing things take time and how do all those pieces start to fit together. But to Eric's point, it would be helpful to understand from stakeholders of what are you all's thoughts on what are the priorities there for us to be able to, again, take that input as we develop that roadmap. I think that would be helpful. And with the load management, it's certainly, we're having internal discussions currently around the technology and how that's used with customers. How do we, similar to some of the DER operations, of how do we hold customers accountable for or what are the potential impacts, if the load management doesn't hold that load, right, and there's potential overloads, what does that start to look like? So there's certainly, conversations happening currently around load management. I know within the EV space, we have a pilot for more of a demand management approach, kind of smart charge management with that. So it's certainly a technology and a use case that we're evaluating and continuing to look at.
I can jump in there. This is Ron. Just in response to Jacob and Eric, I think that the priority is getting the process developed so that we can iterate and determine what the priorities are. So I think that's the key and why we're all here. I don't think that you can just set priorities within this working group and go after them. We've got to have a iterative process that works on these issues, and we need more information before we can tell you what the priorities are and how to achieve them. Because to Tim's point, we don't know where you're at with your technology. So if you're far behind or ahead, the priorities are going to differ. So that's why you got to figure out where you're at in the roadmap, where you're in with your technology strategy, and start determining the priorities there. And the utilities could be in different places, and they likely are in different places. At a high level, a lot of this is about DER integration, load and demand management, and its impact on the distribution system. And so, that's one of our priorities, but that's a complicated priority that requires a lot of work and process.
Got anything, Jacob? Or go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just thinking through that, Ron, I agree that certainly flexibility within the utilities. Each utility is at a different place, but obviously throughout this conversation, we've talked a lot about best practices and what we think that should look like for Maryland. As Eric was kind of saying, we can't tackle all of those things at once, right? And so I think the question that Eric was posing is, getting feedback of which of those best practices, right, that is the end result process, are the pieces that should be potentially focused on first. Again, leaving it up to utilities for flexibility of what fits best for them to develop that roadmap to get to that point. But what of those kind of key anchor points, is where stakeholders think the development should start, I think was what the question was.
And can you give me an example of a key anchor point?
I guess an example would be, you have, DER forecasting that, we have said, I think as a group is a best practice. You have, EV forecasting, different things like that. Obviously, we've talked about hosting capacity upgrades and forecasting for hosting capacity upgrades, and just recognizing that many of those things take processes, right? Take technology, take IT systems, take development, within the workforce. And so, trying to, hear from stakeholders and of all the things that we've talked about through this entire process of where are pieces that people may think are the priorities that utilities should, take that input as they develop those roadmaps.
Tim, you're
If-
nodding. Is it?
If I may.
Sorry, Judge, what was that?
No, Tim was nodding. So, but go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, if I may, as an example, right? To answer to that question and piggyback on what Jacob shared, right? Could there be a focus, on what does a 15-year forecast looks like, right? And that may be one thing that we focus on, right? And try to hit out of the park over the next year or so, or two, whatever it may be. Then we build on the forecast and say we're so we're how are we going to manage stakeholder involvement and things of that nature, right? But trying to deal with this in layers is concerned, right? That, and I'm not saying we got to wait 2, 3, 4 years for all of this, but trying to address everything at one time, right, may be very chaotic, right? Just to give an example, it's just an example. It's not saying that is everything, because the question was, is there an example we can share? So just wanted to share that as an example.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And it didn't sound like Tim was looking for everything right this second, just again, timelines for implementing plans, what have you. Tim, go ahead, and then I'll come to Al.
I think this is useful feedback for us to take back, and I think we can maybe, like, in our follow-up comments, we can try and put together the more specific ask of like what we would expect to see. I think like the output of this group of like what do we expect to see from utilities in terms of like putting together a plan, and then giving you guys a little bit more as much information as we can give you on in terms of what our prioritizations are, like what we think are most important in this, and that can help to inform how you guys interpret and our ask for a plan and a roadmap.
Does that help, Jacob? Okay.
Yep, Judge, I think that does help.
All right. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. I just want to push back a little bit on what Eric just said about focusing on the 15-year plan. I mean, this has been a recurrent concern we had about the utility storm man, which it was focused on the long-term part only. Back when we were in phase one, Molly Knoll, who was then PSC staff and was the person that was responsible for coordinating with the working group, actually wrote in an email that the commission urgently needed the output from the DSP working group for review of MYPs. And so I really think that, if we spend our time now focusing on something, the 15-year plan, I mean, we want that larger framework, but the real application of what we produce is going to start happening soon. And I think it's a distraction to just focus on the long-term part of it without realizing that there are urgent needs. And in terms of priorities, could just, and this is really off the top of my head, but suggest a couple of things. One, there are some already existing constraints that the grid is imposing on the expansion of DERs. And so looking at those, I think, and one example is this reserve capacity issue that we'll hopefully get to a little bit later on, which has really become a serious constraint to solar expansion state, which is at presently sort of arrested by that plus the land use issues. The other thing is to maximize use of the BIL and IRA monies. We actually, I guess we're waiting for the report that the utilities are preparing at the end of the year, last year, on what they have applied for, which is all that's required right now. But I just would encourage us to take advantage of the fact that, you know, depending on how the 2024 election goes, some of that money may be clawed back. And I think that using it most effectively right now, as soon as possible, needs to be an important element of planning as well. So those are just two immediate criteria that I would just throw out there, but also making the point that we need not to be just thinking about the 15-year thing, which is important as a framework, but really thinking about what needs to happen now.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in before we move on a little bit? Yes, Mark, go ahead.
Hey.
Oh, and then we'll come to you, Tim.
Just adding a few quick things in here for Potomac Edison. Just that first, it was just mentioned on the IRA and BIL that the utilities do provide monthly reports as part of Public Conference 56 on any IIJA related applications, and those are on the docket, at least related to that. And you can see what the utilities have applied for and in which cases they've been approved for them. But just want to mention, I mean, I agree with the comments from PHI and BGE. Where First Energy is, I mean, we're going to engage across our organization at First Energy, which obviously Potomac Edison is a part of, in updating our distribution system planning process. And we've already been a part, and the people on this call are on that team as well. And we've already, asked to incorporate the things that are part of the Climate Solutions Now Act, and as well as part of this group. And so, that's how we see how we're doing it. That's the process. I mean, we're taking this feedback to there. So it is usually helpful to have the feedback as to what's prioritized. I mean, obviously, Potomac Edison will meet our Maryland requirements and work to accomplish Maryland state goals, but we're also part of a large organization, just like other utilities are. We need to balance those things of what we can incorporate now and what we can incorporate into the future. So just putting in a plug in, it's really helpful to understand what those priorities are within this group, so we can make sure those are focused on that enterprise-wide goal for this year.
Thanks, Mark. Tim?
I just wanted to make sure that I'm absolutely clear, and I think Al's probably on this side too, but like when we're talking about this, I think this like equally applies to both electrification load, but also DG. So we're talking imports and exports. And so I just want to make sure that we keep our eyes open to both sides of those things, and where it does change the conversation, noting that. But at least in our eyes, most of this is like completely applicable to both sides.
All right. Thanks, Tim. All right. Jacob, don't go anywhere. Mark, you probably weigh in on this as well. Something else Sierra Club noted, they brought up a few things. One of the things they had suggested was your ordering of materials. Try to avoid the supply chain issues that many utilities and society in general are facing now. Do the utilities, I guess, and this is my stockpile, materials, or are you pretty much just kind of waiting for a request for a particular project?
By no means am I a supply expert.
Sure. No.
If there is further questions, we can certainly
Okay.
back. But my understanding is we are very much routinely, forecasting what equipment's going to be needed, and especially with long lead time items, like transformers. Those are things that we are actively looking to purchase well in advance to be able to have the supply to support the work that we're doing. As electrification continues, I would expect that process to continue to support that in that way.
Okay. All right. That's good. I figured it was probably something like that. Mr. Cathan, does that kind of answer your question or answer your point, sir?
Yes, I think that, it's just a point that just, I think it's not just for Maryland Utility. I think that the whole electric industry in the United States, there is, especially on transformers, there's, are issues of supply chain, on them. And I think that it just, we need to be proactive so there won't be any bottlenecks, going forward, especially when customers want to switch over. So I thank you for your answer. We'd like to hear a little bit more.
All right. Thank you, sir. Kevin.
Yeah, it's just weighing in on kind of that supply chain issue. So very much with Jacob, definitely not a supply chain expert, but I think we also need to balance that, because other utilities are having that conversation of, do you try to order more given where lead times are? And it gets to be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If all the utilities start doing that, putting in additional orders, then your lead times and your manufacturing slots just get further and further out there because of this glut of orders. So fully recognizing that, but like I said, there's a bit of a risk to that as well.
All right, fair point. All right, Mr. Cathan, something else you raised in your comments. You brought up streamlined cost recovery, and you had suggested that recovery should be based on projected future loads, and it happened more quickly than every 3 years in rate cases. Did you have an idea as to, first, did I capture that correctly? And two, how would you envision that occurring?
Well, this is, I'll be honest, this is more of a general comment, but I think it kind of fits in with what we've been talking about in terms of, whether it's at the IWG on the MCAM, or whether it's discussion of right sizing, in that there is, there is a dynamic, in rates in which, investments, may need to be done in the short term. We'll have to put in regulatory assets, things like that. I understand all those various aspects. We're just trying to make a general point that, we need to, at least if there are potentially some quick switchovers and there's a need for additional actions, we shouldn't just wait, for the get approval at the rate cases. But I'm not a rate analyst by any stretch of imagination on that also. But the point is that, it's more of a general policy issue that the Maryland, needs to look at, and how do we address a potential quick movement in electrification or for a need for infrastructure.
All right. Thank you, sir. I know you'd raised a few things. I just want to make sure I'm hitting everything. I'm sure the utilities be more than happy to recover things quicker than they do now. Another issue you raised was employment. It's Jacob, I don't know, I'm sure you're probably not a personnel guy, but do the utilities look, kind of forecast their personnel needs based on, other forecasts?
I certainly can't speak to that in detail. I can highlight, I think, both BG and PHI have workforce development programs, where we're, engaging with the communities that we serve and work in, to help develop the pipeline of workers that are going to be needed to support, the ongoing electrification, and the utility industry in general. But I, in terms of detail specific, don't know the details there.
All right, fair enough.
And that's fair enough. And, I think that, after many years where the power engineering programs, we're not seeing not a whole lot of enrollment, and all of a sudden I think there's now a need. So it's an industry-wide issue also, just like the streamlined cost recovery and transformers.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Cathan. Don't go anywhere. You had something in your comments also regarding establishing a reasonable average, excuse me, and maximum target energization time periods. What exactly were you looking for there in terms of, what's reasonable in your mind?
What this kind of goes to some of my earlier questions.
Okay.
Something to do with, time periods, and in terms of, what will be needed in order, to start thinking forward in terms of what is going to be needed. And, is there potentially a disconnect between short-term, plans and the need for, for future needs to comply with CSNA or the ZEV targets and such. So just wanting to, make sure these targets get into the plans and into the forecast.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you clarifying that. All right. Let's see. What else did you hit? Oh, something else you hit, sir, and this is probably more for the utilities on a bidirectional grid. You had talked about potential issues by or avoiding. Excuse me. I don't know why I'm having a tough time talking today regarding protective devices, either reprogramming or removing protective devices to address reverse directional power at substations. I'm obviously not an engineer, but I don't know is that possible from the utility perspective? I mean, I'm sure anything's possible.
And I'm interested in hearing the answer to this too. I'm not a power engineer.
That's why I asked it.
My understanding is that, there are multiple, T&D substations throughout the United States, and I believe possibly in Maryland, who are seeing some backfeed. And so what are the protective devices and what can be done in order, as we go forward?
Okay.
Yeah, Judge, I'll chime in real quick and obviously also defer to the capacity planning and technical groups. I will say, we are planning to kind of put together a little bit of, our view on bidirectional flow and some of the things we're seeing there. Utilities sometimes are slow-moving organizations, and there's been a lot of asks coming out of the working group, and so trying to work through all of those. We weren't able to kind of get that ready for this week, but that is a topic that we were kind of recognized it was a topic before, and didn't want to forget about but weren't fully ready to have that conversation, that presentation today. But in terms of that specific question, David, that you had, I would defer to any of the more technical people from the utilities if they have an answer.
Jacob, do you have a timeline for this?
I think we're hoping by next meeting.
Okay.
We have some internal meetings planned to put that together, and I think the plan was for next meeting.
Very good. All right, Mark.
Hey, so I do have a few of our engineering resources on the phone. I don't want, we can get as technical as you want here. I know that this does get very technical, but I mean, we can describe some of the upgrades that would need to be made to make things bi-directional. Matt, are you willing to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can jump in here and talk a little bit. So, as the electric system has evolved, we've been looking at multiple ways in order to be able to deal with those potential backfeed onto the transmission system or the sub-transmission system and things of that nature, and what protection is required. So we've kind of evolved. Initially, we were using direct transfer trip on our system to be able to handle that, such that if there was a fault on the transmission system, we wouldn't be backfeeding into that particular fault. That was very costly and required cabling and things to be ran all the way to the customer's facility. What we've changed here recently is we're using 3V0 protection, which is essentially a relay protection that would trip our substation breaker device in the event that there's a fault on the transmission side, to protect the transmission system from backfeed in that situation. And the situation is we've got a Delta Y connection from the transmission to the distribution. There would be no way for the solar generator or any generator to be able to see a fault on the transmission side. So it's an automatic opening of that distribution feeder breaker. It gets very complicated. I can't speak to all the details in there, but that's kind of the overview of kind of where we are right now with that. And those plans and things are evolving as we're evaluating these and moving forward.
All right. It's concerning that gets more complicated. So, Mr. Cathan, did that help or hurt or?
That helps, and I understand this is a moving target. You know,
Okay.
I understand that this is a new development that is not just a Maryland issue, and it's just really, as we move towards a larger DER deployment, and perhaps more, especially, I'm not saying especially seeing DERs, whether front of the meter and behind the meter. I think that there is potential for this into the future, and I just would like to, as I think is indicated, as a priority to make sure that bi-directional grids are planned for. And I'm understanding that that there is a lot of detail here that I'm not prepared to have analyzed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Tim, you had your hand up, sir.
Just with the risk of being a little too technical, curious whether or not, I guess this question is probably to Matt, but is the utility looking at those types of like changeovers in protections? Because I understand that like 3v0 is very expensive to retrofit. Is this something that the utilities are looking at in terms of like existing stations, or is it something that they're like more implementing to new stations only? That I guess that's my question, is like whether most of these changes, are they more focused on existing infrastructure or like future infrastructure build out?
Yeah, so currently what we have, of course, with our community solar and things of that nature, with those larger projects, we are retrofitting stations with those projects. And we're in the process of updating our engineering manual and forward looking at, potential new substations that would be coming to implement that with those. However, those are few and far between, as we're installing new. So there's quite a few existing stations that, the retrofit will end up being the answer as those projects come to fruition.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Matt. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? All right. I don't blame you. All right. Let's see. Protected devices. I know Sierra Club wanted more information to the extent that it wasn't a security concern. And I know the utilities are concerned about disclosing that information. Tim, are you still there, or you have any response to on the locations of protection devices, and we've got a solution to how to get around it possibly?
I mean, I certainly don't have a solution. I believe, if I recall correctly, the utilities mentioned in their comments that they were interested in kind of taking this and mulling over it a little bit in terms of what information can be provided. But yeah, I mean, we're in a similar boat with the other stakeholders of recognizing that there are security risks here, and our goal, I think, along with the other stakeholders, is to provide developers with as much information as possible to make good siting decisions. But yeah, I think then this probably is more of a reiteration of what we were talking about last time, of just if we can find ways to provide useful information that also protects sensitive information, whether that can be distances to protected devices that are kind of more, they don't give a specific location of a device, but they can, but you can at least like kind of get an idea of how the scope of an upgrade, or just I think one of the things that we talked about was just plainly being able to identify what the limiting device is also helpful, just so that you know, a developer can know that, like, oh, well, if it's a protective device, then we know that that device needs to be changed. We know that those devices cost some amount. And I believe someone had mentioned the very, like, it's a pretty standard practice to have like almost like a shopping list of like distribution upgrades and what their approximate costs are. And that's also helpful to utilities to developers to come up with costs. But yeah, just kind of throwing out like kitchen sink in terms of like potential information that is not sensitive, but is useful to developers for citing.
All right, thanks, Tim. Eric. Eric, you there?
Yes, just a inquiring. Thank you, Judge. Just an inquiring question on that request. One is in grouping all the other requests. Where would this one fall? Is it at the top of the list, the middle of the list, or the bottom of the list? That would be a helpful feedback for us. In addition to that, right? I think this is touching on hosting capacity, and this is purely a DER request. I'm not sure if this is even a fleet electrification request, or a data center request, or any of the loads that really contribute to the base load on the system, and really you know, the investment that happens in the upgrades on the system that allows us to be able to leverage the system for DERs. So just asking, where on the priority list would this one fall?
Good question. It's reasonably high because these are like this is the thing that is keeping, you know, DER from being cited and being deployed. We also, I think, see it as being a somewhat easier thing to manage because it's not like it's a huge capital expenditure or like a very large process to enable large capital expenditures. It's you know, this is something that needs to happen within the modeling process. It's changes to the modeling process and what information makes it from the models, because clearly, like, when you run these hosting capacity analyses, they identify what, you know, they do know what is the limiting factor, because that's how they calculate what the limiting, you know, interconnection capacity is. And so it's really just about getting that information from the model into the map. So we see this as being a somewhat, not simple, but this is like a smaller lift than creating an entire process by which we forecast future electrification loads and right size, and then like pay for proactive hosting capacity upgrades.
So where does cybersecurity fall into your concerns?
I think it exists in there, but I don't know that this specific request like exacerbates those concerns, because these are existing systems. I mean, you already do the modeling which performs the hosting capacity analysis, and you already maintain a hosting capacity map. And so it's really about a small amount of extra information moving from that model to the map.
And I'm sharing with you the perspectives and concerns from the utility side, because I'm concerned that it is not being considered with the thought of the ask. So sharing with you that there are cybersecurity concerns. on where the location of our switching devices are on our system, our protective devices on our system, right? That I'm not sure if that is being considered in your ask, right? So just providing some feedback, and not necessarily looking for a response today, right? But just knowledge sharing a little bit that your ask has cybersecurity impacts that are grave concerns to the utility. And as we are asking for information that needs to be shared in the general public, I think it is important for us to take into consideration the cyber security concerns around this infrastructure that we are responsible for. Just trying to share, full transparency, trying to share some feedback, right? And as we're asking these requests, that these things are taken into consideration.
No, I definitely, no, I hear that. So I will just say that I think I would classify that as more of like system security rather than cybersecurity. I think cybersecurity typically refers specifically to like data platform, like security in terms of like keeping people out, and hacking, that type of thing. But yeah, no, absolutely recognizing that there's like system security concerns with specific types of information that can be shared. And I guess to that point, we would really love, we've really thrown out a lot of different ideas on what can be, like what is useful to the developers. And maybe this is kind of what was already being, considered by utilities, but it would be helpful to the stakeholders to understand what things can be shared, like what level, how far can we go before it really becomes a security concern? Can you share what the limiting component is? Can you share the distance to the limiting component? Can you share, like again, like obviously I don't need you to do that off the top of your head right now, but it's useful to us to have that information.
Right. Yeah, and Tim, something you said earlier, and you just brought up again, the specific type of device. If you can't give out the distance, is it possible to say, okay, if you interconnect here, there is a device somewhere between X and Y, and this is the kind of device? Is that something that can be disclosed without disclosing the exact location?
The hosting capacity map, I think, already addresses what what size DER you can add to the system at a cost-effective way. If it's a cost decision that's driving the request, the hosting capacity map provides that data in some way, shape, or form by saying you this system, right, will allow for this size DER, and if you need to go beyond that, then you need to have a conversation with the utility. I'm concerned on what is it that the developers would be looking for, right? Additionally, about the protective devices on our system that you wouldn't want to engage the utility on first.
And I mean, I don't want to monopolize this, and I also recognize that I may not be the best person to respond to that, because I've never been a developer and I've never directly worked with developers. But I will say that I do think that there's pretty big variations in what the costs of upgrade are. The hosting capacity map may say that there are 300 kilowatts worth of hosting capacity on this online. you may want to put in a 1 megawatt facility. And the limiting factor could be anything from a $100,000 recloser to a $20 million substation upgrade. And so that's the kind of thing that we want to know, because, or developers want to know, because they may shrug off $100,000 recloser upgrade, whereas the cost of, you know, a huge substation upgrade with a new transformer and everything are clearly going to sink a 1 megawatt facility. And so keeping them from having to engage the utility every time that there's, you know, just a little bit too little hosting capacity is helpful, I think, in actually getting these cited. Because, you know, when you say engage the utility on this, that really involves, you know, if you have pre-application reports, sure, pre-applications, but it also typically involves them putting in a interconnection request. And that's exactly what we've been talking about in terms of like getting the interconnection queues to be their backlog, because you have all these interconnection requests that are essentially just explorative. You know, they're like, oh, well, I don't know. I know that there's not quite enough on this line, but I don't know how much, you know, how much it's going to cost and how expansive this upgrade is. So they're putting in these requests so that they can engage the utility. But at the end of the day, they get to the utility, you know, they get the utility's attention and they learn that, oh, this is a really big upgrade and not a small one. Okay, well, I'm going to pull out. And they've taken all that time.
That's the whole purpose of the hosting capacity maps, though, right? Two things, right? I would, and this is an ask, if as we are bringing these concerns to the table, right, can we bring some examples, some materials that we can look at as a utility to say this scenario, where has it happened? What are we trying to solve against here? Because the examples that are being brought up, as I work with my team and the rest of the teams here at BGE, this is very foreign to me. So if, you know, and I'm not sure, I hope I'm not speaking on too much on behalf of the other utilities here, but it would be helpful that when we are bringing these use cases or scenarios to the table, that there is some examples behind that, because I don't want us looking to solve something that doesn't exist, that it is not an issue, right? So that's one. And I would welcome a conversation, to talk through this. If this is kind of holding up too much time on the working group meeting here, I'm open for us to get in a room and talk through these and bring up some exact scenarios to see, what is it that our hosting capacity map is not solving today. So that's just an ask, right? And as I hope that just like things are being asked of us as the utility, it's okay for us to have some ask of the other stakeholders too.
Yeah, come on, Tim. You can't just ask everything. All right, Jacob, and then Mark, and then Dr. Bartlett.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify something and ask a question of, I think a lot of the conversation really is centering around a world of calls or pays with regards to upgrades. And I think, I think all of us are familiar that Maryland's moving in a direction towards, cost socialization with MCAM, and obviously allowing utilities to be able to propose, at least my understanding from the ruling, propose, hosting capacity upgrade plans. And so I think the question that I have, kind of adding on to what Eric was saying, is in that world where those are the methodologies and systems that are supposed to be what's sending price signals to developers, where does this information lie in terms of importance, right? If those methodologies and those tools are what's supposed to be, providing developers with that information, where's this information then still relevant?
I can take a swing at it. I would say that, so one, I am vaguely, I'm more familiar with the methodology of MCAM because we've talked about it in other states from Strategen's perspective, but I am not super clear on the timelines for MCAM and the certainty of how it's getting implemented. So that's my only concern in terms of that just in case it is 5-10 years down the road, having things in the interim. But you're absolutely correct. And I think we did cover this a little bit last time of in a world where we are fully proactively and socializing all the costs of these upgrades, it does reduce the impact, but it doesn't necessarily entirely remove it. It removes a lot of the interest in cost, but it doesn't necessarily remove the interest in time and delays in actually getting interconnection. So there is still a difference between even if you trigger let's say you trigger an upgrade and it's something small, it may not delay your interconnection. Your costs may be set based on MCAM, but if you're still trying to interconnect to something that a circuit that has a large upgrade, that still could be a 2 or 3 year upgrade that may delay your interconnection. And so the interest shifts from being a cost focus to being a interconnection timeline focus and a time to interconnect focus. And that's where this interest in the scope of upgrades still actually applies.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, go ahead, Eric.
I think we are really taking up too much time on this meeting in regards to this, because a lot of these discussions have been had on the interconnection working group. But just piggybacking a little bit here is the interconnection queue is around I think there's a 90-day response we target. One of the questions that would be very helpful to us on the utility side, if 90 days is not enough, what is enough? How many days does developers need to be able to get feedback from the utility from a request?
I think the issue is not necessarily the 90 days as much as it is when you've got 10 people in the interconnection queue and each of them gets 90 days. Now if you're at the back of the line, that's 900 days.
No. I'm asking about, you put a request in. If 10 people put a request in, the clock starts ticking. When it hits my team, if we get all 10 of those, all 10 of them have a 90-day turnaround time. We don't look at one and then the other from a 90-day perspective, right? So from a developer's perspective, if the utilities have provided an agreement, a service level agreement to say, you put a request in, we'll get you a response by a certain time. And I think the PSC monitors this too, right? If 90 days is not enough, what is enough?
Let me think about that one in terms of what the ask should be.
Fair enough.
And I'm hoping
Again,
Samantha Weaver can join us. I've been emailing her. She might be able to join us this afternoon, so maybe she can lend some developer-specific insights.
that
Tim,
will
if you-
certainly be helpful. Yes.
yeah. We'll just have to try and recreate the question for her. So, Jacob, are you good?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Mark and then Al.
Thanks, Judge. Just wanted to add a few things, a concern and a few suggestions from Potomac Edison. And admittedly, we're pretty early on this journey here. We just committed as part of the interconnection group to provide maps in the next few months here, as well as, add a more detailed hosting capacity analysis into our planning criteria. So we admittedly, we know we're just learning there. We definitely want additional connections. We don't want to do unnecessary studies. So we see, Tim, where you're going at. You want more information up front so you can kind of decide where to even plan these things before you submit an interconnection application request that, as Eric said, the utilities generally do meet our deadlines there. But we worry about the information being used for the right reasons, but perhaps drawing incorrect conclusions. We've seen that on small and large scale where, hey, I feel like I can connect to this transformer, but there's a constraint that there's no way you would know about. Those kind of things. And so that's our worry there is you're going to put in a project saying, I expect this is available, but it's really not. So a couple of suggestions, and I think I talked with Sam Weaver on the interconnection group about this, but what about a more detailed pre-application process? right now, there is ability to do that, but if perhaps the timelines were shorter, perhaps if the information was more detailed, that gets us around some of those CEII issues because it's within like a specific request there. And then the second one is like on the maps. I'm thinking an additional information we could provide if we don't provide system topology is something more like what is the constraint? So, hey, you got 1500 kVA on this available on this line segment, and the constraint is transmission backfeed. Well, Mr. Rosensteel explained how complicated and expensive that can be. So you don't know, but you know that it might be expensive. So those are just things I'm throwing out there for your feedback.
No, and I think that's perfect. I think that's exactly the kind of thoughts we want to put forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think you had raised that last time, Mark, with the pre-application process. So hopefully maybe it's gaining some traction second go round.
Judge, I couldn't remember which work group that was on.
I think it was this one. So it's the only one I'm doing right now. So Al.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Mark's specific input. I've been a little concerned during this phase of the conversation that we started out talking about system security, cybersecurity, and then security more broadly. And then it got mixed up with the concern about hosting capacity. And I was hoping we were going to hold off on that discussion until we get to item 4 and 5, where specifically hosting capacity determination and the determination of reserve capacity was going to be the subject. We have had some of this discussion before, and this conversation seems to have undone some of the things that we realized. But if we remember, actually, back in the January 9th interconnection working group hearing, this working group was charged with studying right sizing as applied to hosting capacity analysis. And again, I hope that Samantha does join, because there are concrete examples in the community solar development process of where the arbitrary 3 megawatt limit on 12 and kV circuit feeders has actually become an obstacle to development on lines which potentially have more development potential than that. And the development potential, and we did have this discussion, varies by circuit. But in New York, the same kind of reserve capacity, excessive reserve capacity existed and was taken to technical analysis, and the decision was made that yes, there should not be this arbitrary setting of limits on capacity, but the capacity should be determined by analysis of each circuit. And in general, that capacity there is found to be between 8 and up to perhaps 12 megawatts total capacity on an 8 or on a 12 to 13 kV line, depending on what's on the line already, other characteristics of the line, some of the security things we've been talking about. Yes, but right now, the hosting capacity maps that Eric is talking about are limited by the definition of hosting capacity that the utilities have decided to apply, which takes away a lot of the potential capacity that community solar specifically needs. And actually, if we do what we have been charged to do and actually come up with a rational approach to hosting capacity on the feeder lines, doing it on a circuit by circuit basis, then we potentially expand the state's ability to develop solar without actually any additional cost in many cases to the utility, to ratepayers, but just making that excess capacity that right now is blocked and is not represented in the hosting capacity maps, making that available for development. So perhaps when Samantha's back on and we actually get to items 4 and 5, we'll have the discussion on a more rational basis, but this one hasn't been too satisfactory.
All right. Sorry to hear that, sir. I know Eric, Samantha should be around 12:15, so maybe depending on when we break for lunch, we'll hear from her. Go ahead, Eric.
That is a legitimate ask, a legitimate example, which is what we were looking for in regards to how we can address some of those issues. So thank you, Mr. Bartlett, for sharing. Right, that is something that we can take back as a utility and provide some feedback. That's specific. Those are some of the things when we share that we're looking for example. That is an example that is to a point that we can react to. Right. So thank you. Just to share, this is something that we have been looking at specifically the BG end. I know we've talked with the PHI team on that also. I think John Borkowski, thank you, did share, that's something that needs to go away, and we're discussing that at the interconnection working group on how we can move forward with enabling or removing that limitation, and it's things that we're discussing. So that is a specific example that I think that's a legitimate concern that we will be providing a response to.
Yeah, and thank you, Eric. And I was just a little concerned that some of this discussion seemed to undo some of the discussions that have already happened in the IC working group and also in this one. And we actually have been charged by the commission to take it on in this group as well. So we should have that discussion, and hopefully maybe when Samantha's on, we can have it.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. And Al, if there's something that if we skip over or we're not hitting, please feel free to tee something up and kick me. If we missed
this one's on your list for, I just thought we'd get to it later.
Yeah, I was just kind of going, I wasn't going necessarily off the list. I was going through folks' comments, but I think I mean I've got it up now. So, but we're kind of in terms of my notes for this today's meeting, we're into hosting capacity now. In terms of OPC sought, modifying the maps and the methods. Tim, one of the things OPC said you wanted to obviously move to monthly updates. We kind of know where the utilities stand on that, but OPC had indicated a quarterly updates would be acceptable in the near term. How are you defining near term?
I think most of them, if I'm correct, have indicated that they're kind of moving in that direction.
Well, joint utilities, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. Yeah. The joint
utilities still crawling, and I don't know about SMECO.
I mean, and I really.
This was just my thought, I'm trying. What are you envisioning? I know, but go ahead.
To the utilities point, I think that I think each of them is different, and so it's hard for me to say. But I think one of the things that may help in identifying that is and I'm pretty ignorant to this, is like the speed at which like DER is interconnecting in those areas. Because quite frankly, like this has to tie to the, you know, to the number of DER that are actually interconnecting. If you only have, you know, 5 DER in your whole service territory interconnecting per year, you don't need to update that quickly. But if you need, so kind of gauging based on, you know, how many DER interconnections do you have? How quickly do circuits go from having capacity to being congested? I think should inform that. And if you're seeing, you know, many circuits from month to month changing over, that really pushes the, you know, the need to have this quicker.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Eric and then Hannah.
I think that was a leftover, Judge. My
Oh,
apologies.
okay. No problem. Hannah,
Hi, Judge. Can you hear me?
we can.
Okay, great. I did just want to piggyback off of what Tim was just saying, that I think it is dependent on the utility. I know that I feel like myself, you know, we're almost at a broken record at this point. We are vastly different than the investor-owned utilities, being as that we're a cooperative. And to date, we have not turned away any, you know, solar application, any interconnection application. So we update our hosting capacity maps. We try to update them annually. So being it that we are a smaller company, smaller workforce, updating these monthly would just be impossible. And I don't think that would apply to us anyways, because we don't have the same constraints that others do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I will say that I think one of my goals with the follow-up comments is to try and create like the top level, like the first set of bullet points, the top level bullet points are, I'm hoping that we can kind of coalesce around like what, again, the goal here is like creating regulations for Comar, and what specificity do we feel comfortable with and can we actually agree on in terms of should regulations, should they say eventually we should get to quarterly, or should they say utilities each need to come up with their own, you know, goal in this? So that's kind of my hope, is that with that format is like, what is this top line? What actually ends up in regulation? And where do utilities stand on, can it say, you know, we need to go to quarterly, we need to go to monthly? You know, it sounds obviously like monthly may be problematic, but you know, what level of specificity can we get to?
I think you get as specific as you want. Like maybe that's kind of what I was thinking with near term, because I know that's probably not a phrase you want to see in regs. But I mean, I'm sure you can fashion the language in such a way where the utilities would have to give updates, you know, periodic updates to the commission as their progress, if we don't set like a specific time. Jacob.
Yeah, Judge, thanks. I was gonna say, I mean, following up on a couple things Han said. One, kind of responding directly to what Tim said there. It's something we've said throughout, is utility flexibility is important, I think, within this, recognizing the differences in the structures of the companies, the systems, the customers that we're serving. And so, you know, as we think about those regulations, I think utility flexibility is very important. And agreeing kind of with one of the point Hannah made around the resources required to make the updates is they aren't insignificant. You know, as it currently stands, you know, it's easy to say just update the hosting capacity maps, but it doesn't happen as fast as I just said it. It definitely takes resources within the organizations to make those things happen. And so I think, you know, as we had kind of put in our comment, it's really trying to balance, you know, the resources required to do the updates and what are the benefits that we're being able to provide those developers, and striking that right balance. And that's kind of, you know, where we landed.
Fair enough. And I realize that a lot of everything that we're going to be asking, or it's going to result from this, is going to result in some kind of a cost to the utilities and ultimately the ratepayers. So just something to think about. Let's see, Jacob, before you click your camera off, OPC on the second page of their comments, do you have it in front of you, sir? first bullet, they talked about how to calculate the hosting capacity just for the purposes of an update.
Oh, this is where I was talking to, because we discussed really briefly about whether or not they can do it as kind of a simple, subtraction of new interconnections from an existing, analysis.
Right. Yeah. Just Jacob, any wag on that?
This one I think we'd have to take back and discuss a little further.
Okay. Fair enough. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, Tim, I'll jump in. I think it might have been me that discussed this, but I don't really have an answer to you. I just kind of felt it was good to make sure we discuss. I mean, again, making monthly updates that just subtract out what's there seems fully reasonable, but a full reanalysis of that area is much more complicated. But as we said, we're still learning in this. So, I mean, PE is not going to be able to give any timelines at this point, but we're definitely committed to getting this process done and then improving in the future.
All right. Thanks, Mark. That's helpful. All right, let's see what else we got here. All right, Jacob. In terms of the hosting capacity maps and the load capacity maps, is it possible to, and Tim, jump in if I'm mischaracterizing this, possible to indicate which DER, I guess make it DER specific? I'm reading my notes and not Tim's comments.
Are you talking about the differences between the types of DERs? Yeah, I think obviously currently we have a hosting capacity map and PHI has an EV load map currently. I think we still had some questions and understanding.
I know you questioned the battery.
Where the value or the difference would be in terms of providing a map for a battery, and so I think understanding that would definitely help us kind of be able to discuss that a little bit further.
Yeah, I think my point to this and what I kind of explained in the sub bullet is I know, for example, PV hosting capacity maps are usually based off of a PV load profile. And I'm not certain if the EV hosting capacity maps are typically based off of an EV charging profile. And so as far as that, those differ, it might be useful to consider that. And so if you're applying a specific profile to EV charging loads in order to come up with your EV hosting capacity or your EV load capacity map, then it may be useful to create a different one for storage, because storage load is going to have a different profile from EV charging. But insofar as you're not doing that, potentially maybe it makes sense for those to be the same. But that's something where I'm a little ignorant.
If I may piggyback on that again, and pardon me, Mr. Cook, but where does having multiple maps now fall in the list of priorities?
I'm not certain if this, well, and I think my hope is that this doesn't end up necessarily being multiple maps. I think it's more of just a clarification of whether or not, particularly the load capacity map applies to both EVs and potentially battery storage systems. And I think that's kind of my ambiguity here right now. And potentially this is solved by simply having a disclaimer in the map rather than having to create a secondary map.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Cathan. Sir, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
That's correct. Now I'm on.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge. So this is a follow-up on some of the conversation we just had now. And it's also related to some of the comments that Sierra Club put in. So, and I don't know the details of the hosting capacity analysis, but is it correct that customer load profile, aggregated customer load profile, is that incorporated into an hourly basis into the hosting capacity maps? Is there a match at the circuit level, to look at what the SCADA data is versus, and for the utilities who have AMI, taking the aggregate amount of, load shown by the customers on that feeder or that circuit, is there a comparison, to determine when does that load occur? And then it goes to the second point that, we also bring up in Sierra Club is there then a potential way of using with storage, or whether using demand flexibility programs or whatnot in order to adjust load such that you can increase hosting capacity. So the fundamental question is, the use of load data. Do the utilities use that as part of the hosting capacity analysis? And if they don't, I think it's best practice to do that.
I will say right now, I don't know the specifics. I would defer to any of the technical people in the call to be able to answer that. If not, we can certainly take that back and give a little description of the current process.
Yeah, and Jacob, just for your own reference, it was on pages 5. It's comment number, I guess, paragraph number 3, determining hosting capacity, pages 5 and 6 on Sierra Club's comments. Right. And I think it just more or less goes to the accuracy of determining hosting capacity. All right.
Got it. We'll take a look further.
Okay, good. Yeah, I got a list for you. All right, let's see. Al, I know that was one of the issues you wanted to hit. I'm sure you're not going to be satisfied with that, but something to look forward to in February. All right. Jacob, well, the fifth bullet I had was DER forecasting for use in determining reserve hosting capacity. Do you guys have any input on that, or does anybody want to weigh in on it?
No, I'll say several of those items that came over from the interconnection working group. I think using DR forecasting for right sizing,
right? Yep.
Reserve hosting capacity, as well as the determining hosting capacity. We haven't had a chance to talk further on.
Okay.
Those are topics we want to dive a little bit deeper on, and
okay.
Not prepared at the moment to speak on them in depth.
Okay. All right. All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, no, I would only add that there are examples from other states that have had to go through this process. New York being one, I think New Jersey's another, but that in terms of doing circuit-specific determinations of reserve capacity rather than having some kind of blanket figure. So there, for the utility's sake, as you begin to look at this, it would be useful to see what's being done in those other states where they've made that change.
And real quick, I just want to clarify, at least my understanding of the interconnection working group was that there was already agreement that the utilities were moving towards circuit specific calculations.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well.
Okay.
Which is why the earlier discussion confused me, where we were sort of saying that it was what it is. But yeah, I think that's in process, and I don't quite, and others may know, what our working group has been asked to do in this regard, but we were in that January 9th hearing asked to do something, which was, it said, should study right sizing as applied to hosting capacity analysis. So that's, I mean, maybe we can just agree what that task is for us, and then we can do it.
Obviously, if we commission asked us to try and hit it, we should probably do that. I mean, I would think that would kind of fall in. All right, welcome to the party, Eli. I would think that would fall in forecasting for right sizing interconnection upgrades. Does that
I think
sound
that,
okay?
I think it's the same thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So after today, I will continue to include those items, probably 4 through 7, on my email from a couple weeks ago for follow-up items, in addition to the issues that we've noted here today to follow up on. So,
and I think, Judge, I think that's one of the things that we're bringing it back to provide some more comments in terms of details on what we see as being that directive and what we would want to see from it.
Okay, good. So I'm thinking probably next week will probably be or 2 weeks probably be a long meeting, because I want to keep the progress going forward. All right. Let's see. Cost estimation tools. I know we kind of hit on this a little bit with Tim's discussion about more information, and I know the utilities are, or at least the joint utilities are hesitant. I don't know if we're going to get any further on that issue or not in terms of the cost estimation tools. Go ahead, Tim.
And I don't feel strongly about rehashing this. I think that I think the utilities have a good point that both it's difficult to do, but it's also becoming less important because of MCAM. And I should probably educate myself, and actually Eli probably knows more about this, but educating myself on when exactly MCAM is coming into effect and the actual exact principles behind it and what is likely to be approved. So yeah, I don't know that I would beat that.
Okay. All right. Eli, go ahead.
Hey, Judge. Hey, all. Sorry for not being here for the
no apology necessary
today. No, I just wanted to jump in. I heard my name mentioned right as I hopped in about MCAM. So I'm not, and I apologize to maybe barge in like this, but curious where kind of we're at in the discussion, and I heard MCAM being discussed. So happy to jump in and provide color.
We've actually worked out everything.
DSP is solved.
Yeah,
Eli, I think my point being, and this is just came up relevant to hosting capacity maps and what is provided on them, and we had put forward, the potential for cost estimation tools or cost estimates within them, and coming to the conclusion that this really depends on whether or not MCAM, like the impacts of MCAM, because it really changes how costs are allocated. And I'm pretty ignorant as to what the status of MCAM is, what the timeline would be for implementation, etc. And I don't know if you know.
Yeah, let me highlight what I do know, and if there are others on this call who have been taking part in the interconnection work group, feel free for obviously anyone jump in to mischaracterize. But MCAM was just approved by the commissioners. I can't remember what I think the date of the rulemaking was January 8th. Or that was the date of the hearing. And I don't know if there is I'm curious if others who are maybe more familiar with Maryland specific processes know if there's a specific, if there's something additional that is expected to come out of the hearing that will further establish that MCAM is kind of official and to be implemented. I don't know if there's an additional step in that regard, but effectively as of the RM 81 hearing just about 2 weeks ago, MCAM is approved. I believe the requirement is for utilities to implement procedures around MCAM within 1 year of its approval. So I think it's 1 year from now. How the cost estimation tools themselves will evolve, because I think that was a piece that I heard, is not explicitly determined. It will kind of be up to utilities to develop a methodology. But that's kind of where we're at in the stages of implementation. But again, I don't have all of the Maryland specific context, and if others who are involved in the RM81 process have additional context to add, definitely please do so. And I see some hands raised.
Yeah, I don't think that there's going to be an order coming out of it. I know there'll be some minutes published eventually, but I recall John saying that he didn't anticipate an order coming out. So to the extent that helps or hurts, but there's been nothing filed since January 5th, which was John's report.
So it sounds like the minutes might kind of effectively act as that like implementation date trigger once those are issued.
That would be my guess, but that is nothing more than a guess. So,
no, that's helpful nonetheless, Judge.
Okay. Mark.
Hey, I'll jump in here being on the group first. Eli, glad to see you. Your video is not coming through. There's some kind of an error if you wanted to get on, at least on my side. As I understand, the minutes will need to be filed, and then that will actually need to be published in the Maryland Register for a number of days before that then comes back to the commission after any public comment for a final approval. So there's typically the 2 rulemakings that will need to take place. And it's my understanding that after that second rulemaking session is then when it is final, and that's the effective date, and then it would be 12 months from there. Don't say that we're trying to slow roll the process. We're working on figuring out how to do MCAM, but it's our understanding that that date, which I think would be about a couple months into the future, would then start that 12-month clock. But you are right, and Tim is right, that we are still working on exactly what that's going to mean. What is it going to look like for a developer? But it will need those 12 months to figure that all out.
Thanks, Mark. That helps a lot. I really appreciate that guidance.
Of course.
So yeah, with that, that's quicker than I expected it to be. And with that understanding, and I mean, maybe it makes more sense to say, to keep that in mind of potentially incorporating, because MCAM would make the in theory, it makes the calculation of costs to interconnect simpler or at least more uniform. Potentially, it's appropriate for the interconnection, the hosting capacity maps to include those costs. And so it's just a good place to have those costs incorporated such that when a developer is looking for siting, they see what the MCAM cost would be. But again, not knowing what the specific implementation is going to be of how MCAM costs are calculated, maybe that doesn't make sense, but it's something that can be kept in mind.
So the MCAM will require a utility tariff filing that identifies what those specific costs are. Again, I don't know how exactly it's going to look, and a tariff is not maybe the most easy place for a developer to look at, but we will have to file those and get approval of those costs.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So at least that seems like something that was agreed upon, or at least a little bit of progress. There's a few things that left from my list that I'd like to hit, but it's noon right now. So why don't we plan on taking a break? Is half hour, 45 minutes good for folks? All right. We'll go with
45 works for me, Joe.
All right, we'll go with 40.
About anyone.
We'll go with 45 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll talk. I sent out the Solar Ready Energy System presentation from, I think it was Pepco. Jacob, is that something that you can give a quick overview, dog and pony show about when we come back? Because I know there were some questions about it last time.
Yeah, I can do my best to walk through it. I know you had asked if people wanted a presentation. I didn't see anything, so I can at least walk through it. If not, I'll also try and pull in the person that's a little bit more familiar with it than me to speak.
Okay. Well, we'll plan on leading off with that. If folks don't want it, then we'll move on to the next thing, which is locational value, and then I've got resiliency and reliability, and then finally coordination with PJM. So that'll be the agenda. Yes, sir, Mr. Cathan.
I just want to make sure I reserve a little bit of time for a couple of comments that are still on my list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My list is not exclusive, sir. And if there's something that I have missed that you or OPC or the utilities want to talk about, please feel free. Don't feel limited or constrained by my agenda. Okay, sir.
No problem. Happy to put it, to later, but I just wanted to make sure that put a pin on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if somehow I forget, just jump in. All right.
Sure enough.
Yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, that's thing. And I just am rooting for keeping the relationship between MCAM and hosting capacity analysis is real, but additional cost is incurred for a distributed generator that wants to add to a limited circuit. If the limitation on the circuit is determined to be greater and can accommodate that new distributed generation, then that cost is avoided. So MCAM and right sizing are related, but they're not the same thing. And I just want to keep them a little bit apart in this discussion because we seem to be mixing the two together.
Okay. And Tim agrees with you, sir. All right. Okay. So with that, we'll see everyone back at 12:45. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.